Initiative is a mechanic that made its debut in Commander Legends Battle for Baldur's Gate. The Dungeons & Dragons themed mechanic is a different sort of spin on the venture into the dungeon mechanic from Adventures in the Forgotten Realms. That mechanic was fairly underwhelming in pretty much every form of Magic, so they really wanted to push the mechanic this time, and they definitely succeeded. Maybe a little bit too much. If a card gives you the initiative, it means that you venture into one specific dungeon, the Undercity. This is a game piece separate from your deck, and anytime you venture, you either start at the secret entrance or advance one room from top to bottom. You get to venture into the Undercity anytime you take the initiative and during your upkeep if you have the initiative. In other words, the first time you take the initiative, you immediately get to search up a basic land and put it into your hand, and then if you still have the initiative on your next upkeep, or you take the initiative again, you can choose to get 2 +1/+1 counters or scry 2, and it just gets better from there, eventually culminating with you putting the best creature in your top 10 cards on the battlefield with 3 +1/+1 counters and temporary hexproof. There is one downside to all of this. Any player can take the initiative from another player by doing combat damage to them. Basically, having the initiative gives you insane value every single turn. It's kind of like having a modal saga or planeswalker that you didn't pay any mana for. And while there's that downside that your opponent can take it from you, if they can't, it's often game over, since you get so many free effects. And getting those effects really snowballs, since they make it more likely you're going to hold on to the initiative. The mechanic has only appeared so far in Commander Legends Battle for Baldur's Gate, and as a result, the only 60 card formats initiative cards have been legal in are Legacy, Vintage, and Pauper, and this mechanic managed to shake up all 3 of those formats in a big way. In fact, even though there are only 27 cards with initiative, 5 of them have been outright banned in at least one format, and 20 of them have at least one top 8 at a high-level Magic event. Therefore, it really isn't an exaggeration to say that initiative is one of the most broken mechanics of all time. So while it's safe to say they succeeded in making a dungeon mechanic more powerful the second time around, the pendulum definitely swung a little bit too far in that direction. In this video, we'll look at the 10 initiative cards that have left the biggest impact on competitive Magic the Gathering. This video is sponsored by Card Kingdom. Use the links in the description to visit their store. Before we get started, here's a quick reminder on how I rank cards in these videos. A first tier top 8 is worth 2 points. This includes events like Pro Tours, and a second tier top 8 is worth 1 point. This includes events like regional championships. At number 10, it's Aarakocra Sneak and Vicious Battle Rager. I have them here together because they are very similar cards, and they have very similar histories. Both of them let you take the initiative when they enter. The Sneak is 3 generic and a blue for a 1/4 flyer, and the Battle Rager is 3 generic and a black for a 1/5, and when it becomes blocked by a creature, that creature's controller loses 5 life. Both of these are great, both because they give you the initiative and they help you take it back should you ever lose it. The Sneak's flying and the Battle Rager's block trigger both make it more of a challenge for your opponent to keep themselves from taking combat damage. Their high toughness also means they can help protect the initiative too. So yeah, there is a ton of power here, especially for commons. So much power that both of these, along with Stirring Bard and Underdark Explorer, quickly got banned out of Pauper, a format where only commons are legal. These 4 commons warped the format into entirely being about venturing into the Undercity, and that was obviously a huge problem. These bans eliminated decks that were all about initiative in the format, and it's unlikely they ever gained points again as a result of that ban. At number 9, it's Ravenloft Adventurer. It's part of a cycle of rare adventurers, there's one for each color, and they let you take the initiative and give you some kind of effect that you get an upgraded version of if you complete a dungeon. For 3 generic and a black, this adventurer is a 3/4 that gives you initiative when it enters, and if a creature an opponent controls would die, you instead exile it and put a hit counter on it. And whenever the adventurer attacks, if you've completed a dungeon, the defending player loses 1 life for each card they own in exile with the hit counter on it. So, in addition to all the sweet dungeon value, the adventurer also hates on the graveyard, even turning off the death triggers of your opponent's creatures, which is a pretty big deal, and if you complete a dungeon, which the adventurer and your other initiative cards are likely to help you do, you also get to punish your opponent for all the cards that you exiled with it, and indeed it saw play in legacy decks with other initiative creatures, since things snowball even faster when you can venture into the dungeon more than once a turn. But the Adventurer is pretty good even without initiative friends, and as a result it's shown up in the main deck and sideboard of various other decks in the format too, like Reanimator and Leyline of the Void combo decks. However, the Adventurer doesn't have any top 8 since the first half of 2024, and it might be done gaining points. At number 8, it's Trailblazer's Torch. For 4 generic mana, it's an equipment, and when it enters, you take the initiative. And whenever the equipped creature becomes blocked, it deals 2 damage to each creature blocking it. You can equip it for 1 generic mana. Without the interest trigger, Trailblazer's Torch would be a pretty terrible card, and that shows you just how strong having initiative is. And indeed, the Torch can help you take the initiative back, as if your opponent has creatures that are too small to block whatever is equipped with this, they'll lose their creature in an ugly chump block, which means a creature carrying this Torch has a good chance at hitting your opponent and letting you venture into the Undercity. The Torch has gained most of its points as a singleton card in Legacy Stoneforge Mystic decks, which can tutor up equipment and put them into play at a discount, and being able to grab a card that lets you venture into the dungeon is the right thing to do on many board states, especially if it's time for one of the most powerful rooms. The Torch also has 1 point in Pauper, but it hasn't seen play there since the bulk of the common initiative creatures got banned in the format. However, it certainly got a shot at more Legacy top 8s in the future. At number 7, it's Passageway Seer. For 3 generic and a black, it's a 2/2 with lifelink. You take the initiative when it enters, and at the beginning of your end step, if you have the initiative, you put a +1/+1 counter on Passageway Seer. The starting stat line is tough, but the Seer makes sure you get value right away with its trigger, and if getting value from the Undercity isn't good enough for you, it makes sure you get even more out of it since it grows itself, and it'll usually be a 3/3 by the end of the turn you play it and just get bigger from there. Lifelinkers that can grow can quickly put the game out of reach, especially against aggressive opponents. The Seer's points have all come in Legacy, and kind of like with Trailblazer's Torch, it's generally been played as a singleton copy of a card that you can tutor up. In this case, you can grab it with Recruiter of the Guard. Being able to do dungeon stuff whenever you want to and get a lifelinker to disrupt a race feels pretty good in many situations, but the Seer doesn't have any top 8 since 2023. At number 6, it's Servok's Tome. For 4 generic, it's an artifact, and you take the initiative when it enters. You can also tap it for colorless, and if you have the initiative, you get 2 colorless instead, which, yes, means that at a minimum, the turn you play it, the tome can tap for 2 colorless. And if you've completed a dungeon, you can also pay 3 generic, tap it, and exile cards from the top of your library until you hit a non-land. You exile that card, and you can cast it without paying its mana cost. A 4-mana artifact that taps for 2 mana is pretty solid, and when you factor in all of those dungeon triggers you get, including the turn it comes down, you're getting an amazing deal here. Plus, at some point, it can start firing off free spells. It's been featured in Legacy, where a singleton copy shows up in the sideboard of Planeswalker control decks, which run Karn the Great Creator. Karn's -2 can grab an artifact out of your sideboard and put it into your hand, so just like Passageway Seer and Trailblazer Torch, this initiative card is something of a toolbox card that you grab when you really need some dungeon action. The Tome is also active in vintage Mud decks. These decks are all about producing absurd amounts of mana to cast artifacts, most notably using Mishra's Workshop, and while the Tome isn't quite that busted, you can only run 4 workshops, and having the Tome as a mana rock that can also turn into a win condition with its activated ability is pretty great, especially once you think about the fact that you're probably venturing into the dungeon every turn. These decks, of course, also run lots of tutors. You can get the Tome with Tinker or Inventor's Fair if you have to. Servok's Tome is still active right now, but so are most of the cards ahead of it. At number 5, I've got both Avenging Hunter and Goliath Paladin. At number 10, we talked about the 4 initiative creatures that quickly got banned out of Pauper. These 2 managed to escape the ban hammer by virtue of not being as good. They are 5 mana instead of 4, and they don't come with big upside built in. Like those 4 banned cards, both of these let you take the initiative when they enter. The Hunter is 4 generic and a green for a 5/4 Trampler, and the Paladin is 4 generic and a white for a 3/6 with Vigilance. Because of those bannings, these 2 cards are the best way to do initiative stuff in Pauper, and as a result they see plenty of play in the format. The value you get from venturing into the dungeon is just absurd in a format with only commons. There's really not much that's more powerful. While there aren't dedicated initiative decks in the format, many decks in the format are pretty happy to venture into the Undercity with these 2. They're both likely to continue to put up top 8s in Pauper in the future. At number 4, it's Undermountain Adventurer, another card from the Adventurer cycle. For 3 generic and a green, it's a 3/4 with Vigilance. You take the initiative when it enters, and it can tap for 2 green, or 6 green if you've completed a dungeon. Even without the awesome upside of sometimes tapping for 6, the Adventurer is a powerful card for its ability to generate sweet dungeon value while also having a decent body and ramping your mana. Its points have all come in Legacy alongside other Adventurers in Gruul Stompy decks, and it's going to continue to put up top 8s, many of them alongside the number 3 card on the list, which is Caves of Chaos Adventurer. For 3 generic and a red, it's a 5/3 with trample, and when it enters you take the initiative. When it attacks, you exile the top card of your library and you can play it this turn, and if you've completed a dungeon, you can play it this turn without paying its mana cost. A 4-mana 5/3 trampler that pretty much draws you a card when it attacks is already good, so adding all of that initiative stuff is really exciting. It was played in initiative-centric decks in Legacy, but it's also put up plenty of top 8s in Dragon Stompy decks. These are prison decks that look to lock your opponent out of their mana with Blood Moon and similar effects, while running tons of red creatures that generate lots of value, and I think there's an argument that Caves of Chaos Adventurer is the second best creature in the deck, surpassed only by Broadside Bombardiers. As a result of being good even on its own, the Adventurer is going to continue to rack up points in the Eternal formats. At number 2, it's Seasoned Dungeoneer. For 3 generic and a white, it's a 3/4, and when it enters, you take the initiative, and whenever you attack, target attacking cleric, rogue, warrior, or wizard gains protection from creatures until end of turn, and it explores. Yeah, this is insane. It gives you the nice initiative trigger up front, and then its attack trigger is the really impressive cherry on top. Notably, the Dungeoneer is a warrior, so it can target itself, which means you'll always be able to take advantage of it, making it unblockable and growing it or drawing a card. And of course, it also works on other creatures because it's an attack trigger. The Seasoned Dungeoneer itself doesn't have to attack, so oftentimes it can come down and give you that trigger up front. Obviously, protection from creatures also means that taking the initiative back from your opponent is a cinch. It's put up tons of top 8s in both Legacy and Vintage, primarily in initiative-centric decks, but it's good in a vacuum too, so it's seen play in plenty of other decks, like Arena Rector Combo and Bant Aggro. Seasoned Dungeoneer is going to continue to put up top 8s going forward, and it has a good chance to top the number 1 card on this list. For now though, that card is White Plume Adventurer. That means 4 of the 5 adventurers are on this list, including 3 of the top 4 cards on it. Yeah, it's a pretty insane cycle. For 2 generic and a white, White Plume Adventurer is a 3/3 that gives you the initiative when it enters, and at the beginning of each opponent's upkeep, you untap a creature you control, and if you completed a dungeon, you untap all creatures you control. It's the cheapest of the adventurers, and that means you can get initiative going a full turn earlier, which also generally means you'll be completing the dungeon and getting all that value a turn earlier. The untap effect isn't irrelevant either, as it can give you pseudo-vigilance at worst, and sometimes it can even allow you to use more activated abilities and the like. The Adventurer quickly became a staple in Legacy, and as a result of its presence, virtually every white deck in the format was running it alongside Seasoned Dungeoneer, and these decks were absolutely crushing everyone. These were called Initiative Hate Bear decks because in addition to these 2 value engine creatures, the deck ran lots of disruptive creatures like Thalia, Guardian of Thraben, so they were really able to pull way ahead of virtually any opponent, and as a result of all of that, the Adventurer ended up getting banned in Legacy less than a year after being printed. However, it continues to put up tons of top 8s in the most powerful format of all, which is Vintage, where it continues to see play in more traditional Hate Bear decks, as well as that format's version of Initiative Hate Bear. In the long run, White Plume Adventurer will probably get passed by the Dungeoneer because the 2 cards are played together about 85% of the time in Vintage, and the Dungeoneer can still put up top 8s in Legacy. Still, it's pretty clear that White Plume Adventurer is the best initiative card. It had to be banned in one of the Eternal formats, and it's heavily played in the other one, and there aren't that many cards in Magic, especially printed in the recent past, that can say that. So, those are the best initiative cards. I hope it's become clear that this mechanic is insanely strong. If you'd like to build a deck around this very powerful mechanic, check out the description where you can find a direct Card Kingdom link for each card that appeared in the video. If you want to make sure you catch future videos, don't forget to subscribe. And if you want to catch up on past videos, including many more that look at specific mechanics, you should see a playlist on your screen shortly. Thanks for watching.